Good morning, everyone. My name is Cheikh Mbow. I'm the Executive Director of START International. And thank you, Vivi, for bringing this great framing of our slideshow. The part two of the slides will tackle the issues of principles and processes for transdisciplinary research. It is particularly important that everybody bear in mind that everything we will be talking about is the issue of design, an issue of improvement of the process and ways to implement for impact. So the key processes here will tackle issues related to metrics, process of control, and ways to evaluate the impact of transdisciplinarity. In this slide, we would like to remind to everyone the important structural elements of sustainability science and mostly the problems which are underlining those issues. So I would like to cluster the table, which is quite complex here, in two main groups of ideas. The first group of ideas is what I call the framing concept. The framing concept spans the issue of systemic approach, the issue of system thinking, of socio-ecological system, the concept of the context, which matters when it comes to transdisciplinarity, but also, and importantly, the issues of adaptive management, how to adjust and embrace critics while involved in implementing transdisciplinarity. And finally, for the conceptual framing, the issue of scale, the spatial scale and the time scale. All those things are important, framing issues that needs to be considered. Then in the second cluster, as you can see in this table, there is more elements of actions. And that is really important when it comes to transdisciplinarity. When we talk action, we cannot avoid talking about the issue of integration, which has been an issue that is discussed across all transdisciplinary approaches, integration of various aspirations, integrations of stakeholders' perspective, but also science integration as a way to really embrace the requirement of transdisciplinarity. This cannot avoid another important aspect of action, which is the normative aspects of science and society, but also the method-based and approaches to develop and use knowledge for transdisciplinarity and sustainability. We cannot, just finish this, interpretation of the table without talking about the various options and aspirations of groups. What are the perspectives? And how that perspective can reflect in the impact-oriented solutions that needs to be put in place. So, lesson taken is the issue of the framing concept as a behavioral attitude for transdisciplinarity, but also how to, embrace the need of actions by getting some of these principles, which are the integration, the normative aspects, and the action-oriented aspect. So this table is a continuation of the previous statement and, try to give a kind of TD processes which everyone can embrace, but it's just a snapshot of one example that can be, a way to follow. We would like to bring the analytical elements through which we need to implement transdisciplinarity. But here, if I wish, I would focus on the issue of co-creation, which is the middle part of the graph. The co-creation, which means to us how to develop alignment between science and different stakeholders, and descriptions of the concept and method to stakeholders. That means a lot of knowledge translation. Most often, the science perspective is totally different in time and space with the stakeholders' perspective. And without iterative and interactive, collaboration between scientists and stakeholders, the issue of knowledge translation will be slack. So along the rest of the presentation, I'll be reiterating the requirement and the importance of knowledge translation and the alignment between science and stakeholders, without which transdisciplinarity will not happen. Stakeholders' participation is key. So another important element in this graph is the issue of expectation for solutions to resolve sustainability challenges. There is a high level of expectation that the science is not always able to deliver, using transdisciplinarity approach. So there is a competition between transdisciplinarity and sometimes monodisciplinarity when it comes to address societal problems. And that kind of tension should be managed when we suggest solution to stakeholders, that our solution is projecting the sustainability in a longer term perspective rather than a shorter term perspective, which most of the monodisciplinary approach will suggest. So one of the challenges to do that is a disorder in integration, knowing how to do integration, orders of integration, and make sure that the knowledge which are taken here are readily useful for implementation of transdisciplinarity and sustainability issues is a big challenge. So integration will be remaining a big challenge for the transdisciplinary approach. In this slide, we try to have some of the phases of transdisciplinarity, and it goes along with the previous slide in terms of processes. So basically what it brings is the issues of stating the problem together and mostly the goals, what do we need to achieve, do so co-production, which was the central part of our previous slide, and make sure you get the results and the impact you want, and communicate those results and impact for scaling up or for replicability or even for feedbacks to improve the approach which was developed previously. So as you can see, we're trying to get this phase, but transdisciplinarity is never a linear process. We should consider all the feedbacks, the reaction and iterations that is needed to manage the system, to change what needs to be changed, to improve participation, to engage more with stakeholders, and to balance the process for a better outcome and achievement. And we cannot just go further in our presentation without telling to the audience how much transdisciplinarity can be different from other approaches. In this table, we can see that we have different ways to deal with science for development. The disciplinary approach, you all know, it's one objective for one discipline. We have multidisciplinarity where different objectives are tackled with different disciplines, and the interdisciplinarity with one objective this time tackled with different disciplines. And when it comes to transdisciplinarity, the difference between transdisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity is the engagement of stakeholders, is to bring the scientists and the stakeholders to negotiate the objectives, the methods, the approach, the normative requirement to achieve a single goal. So it requires a lot of transactions, and it's more heavy to implement than any of the above methods. So this is important, graph we taken from Klein to illustrate what transdisciplinarity means. It's a single objective, but an engagement between scientists together with the stakeholders in a very balanced way. So very difficult to achieve, but not impossible. In this graph, with the logics of co-production, we try to bring the set of behavior that we need to recognize and use when it comes to transdisciplinarity. The issue of accountability. It's not just writing a paper and throw it in the society for them to know and understand how to use the science. It's to be accountable in the sense that the people who are engaged in the process are custodian of the process, and they're accountable of the outcome and the output. So we have to share and reference to the society when it comes to transdisciplinarity. It's not just doing science, it's doing science for society and with society. The issue of the principle of impact-oriented, that's the logic of impact, which means that we need to engage ourselves into implementation. And that's kind of big change in the behavior of scientists. We usually define ourselves not being agent of implementation. The implementers are the people who are in the developing agencies. But for transdisciplinarity, there is a requirement for us to engage into into the actions itself. And that needs a lot of mindset shift from the scientists to be at that level. And the last one, as a key behavioral principle, is the issue of humility. For the first time, the people who used to work in their laboratory and just deal with their equipment and field data now are asked to listen, to embrace, to combine, and to consider everything that the stakeholders would like to see in the process. So that means that you take a lot of hats from your head and have a humility attitude for acceptation and embracing other values and know and deal with uncertainty and accept questions. And these kind of iterations and behavioral attitude are very important if you have to be successful in transdisciplinarity. This graph is just a recall of what integration means for transdisciplinarity research. So we have different type of integration. We have the cognitive and epistemic integration, which is taking different disciplines and putting them together and to bring the piecemeal set of knowledge that converge into addressing a problem, but at the same time explore ways that knowledge from science will address the real world issues. How to combine the empirical knowledge of the community and the stakeholders with the normative knowledge of science to create a new layer of knowledge that can be useful for sustainability and benefits to all stakeholders. That's what we call the cognitive and epistemic integration. The social and organization integration require a kind of managing the interests of different organizational structure, trying to bring different institutions to work together, trying to bridge one social aspiration towards another social aspiration. Because if we come to society, the aspiration, depending to stakeholders, can be different. Farmers can have different perspective as compared to pastoralists, as compared to fishermen. So the distinction and correlation between the interests and activities of people are very important to consider in this integration. And lastly, it's a kind of communicative integration. It's what's the common discourses that needs to be channeled to the society for everybody to understand the sense of the action. So if we have different discourses and nuances of what we want to achieve, the communication will not be effective in terms of bringing everybody to work together to achieve what we need in terms of sustainability. So these issues of integration at the tree level are extremely useful and important to consider. So now in terms of collaboration, I think that's where a lot of TD programs failed, because at the bottom to the end of TD, the issue of collaboration is central. Collaboration is about relationship, is about trying to achieve together what we can't achieve alone, is therefore a set of practice and principle to create trust, to create equity and transparency. That leads directly to what we can call the process learning towards outcome. It's rather technical. This process learning towards outcome is extremely important, but it's modulated by something which is even more important than the socio-political system in place. So nothing can be taken out of its context, and the socio-political context will be modulating the type of collaboration on which we will sustain the content and the evolution of the transdisciplinary approach. So spending time to talk about ways to collaborate is extremely important. It's not new to TD. It has been as old as the need of crossing knowledge and responding to society. But in TD, it comes out as a strong parameter for success, and we need to stay and spend a lot of time in dealing with this kind of collaboration framework that matters for transdisciplinarity. So to trickle down a little bit on the challenges we have, we want to share here the factors that enable or constitute barriers and lessons for transdisciplinarity. In terms of enablers, all knows that transdisciplinary starts with knowledge. So we need knowledge and expertise. But the knowledge is not just the knowledge from science, it's also the knowledge that is related to practice, that the stakeholders' wisdom embrace to respond to their daily needs. It's all about taking science to society, bridging science with society, and making sure to have a blended knowledge and learning system that brings society to respond to their questions. That's the enabling phase. But when it comes to barriers, we have, as human beings, it's normal. It happens to our family, it happens to our institutions, it happens in the street, it happens everywhere. Human relationships are never set on stone. It's very difficult to anticipate what people's behavior can be. And that is really the dimension of psychology that needs to be brought into the transdisciplinarity approach, the human relationship. And connected to that, the issue of power relationship, not only individual power, but institutional power relationship into this transdisciplinarity. Some institutions stronger, obviously, tends to dominate, or people who are bolder and more assertive tends to dominate. And that power relationship should be managed in a way that everybody has a voice to contribute to the process. And I would add to those few things, the issues of communication comes in, and information, obviously, to share the knowledge. But what I would add is the issue of hidden interest or hidden agenda and issues related to conflict of interest. When it comes to development, obviously, the stake is about sometimes, developing, funding, having resources. And if we go back to the tragedy of Communal by Garrett Hardin in 1968, the big issue of human being is to try to grasp as much profit as possible on the expense of others. And this can create some tensions when it comes to transdisciplinarity. But good thing is that there is some lessons that can be taken in terms of behavior, how to engage, how to be committed. And this behavior of commitment, flexibility, and individual transformation are important. That's the way we learn to become transdisciplinary. And if you're doing, as we do in START, a lot of transdisciplinarity training, that transformation at individual level to be able to contribute to a group of working on TD is a key challenge that needs to be considered. Then we came up with the teamwork challenge, following up from the previous one, how to become a good team member. You have to be able to be open to dialogue from other disciplines, trying to understand what the other is saying. Does not mean you have to be expert on everything, but you have to get a kind of personal, quality as a person to accept and embrace new knowledge, new information from new discipline. We have to nurture also the issue of trust and respect to others. And that starts by listening to others and consider, blending or bundling what you know together with the stakeholders and the other disciplines. And the most important aspect of the team building here is the issue of shared responsibility, the issues of engaging into your role as a contributor to a process, not just like in an expectative mood where you wait for others to do it and you take credit, but work and contribute and play a role, set the goals together, identify the product, and engage in a process that leads to an outcome. So these are some important personal elements that are good to consider. So in this section, this slide of the outcome, overcoming the challenge, it's kind of the solution that we suggest for doing transdisciplinarity. And let me tell you, it is just indicative. It's just a set of things. As a team, Vivi, my colleagues, and others have set to make a kind of orientation recommendation how to do things. For a team to work, we believe that planning is key. Planning together, planning and organizing the process together, accepting the main goal together, defining the norms, setting the subgroups, and having a work plan that is clear in the mind of people with shared responsibility and ways to engage of everyone. That's kind of, let me quote unquote, a democratization of a process of learning. So the second element that comes from this text is the issue of exploring the ability of each of the team members in working in different, intergroup experiences, and use those people as, facilitators or animators of the process, because not everyone has the experience of working with 50 people or 20 people coming from different horizons. And this needs really to be explored when we have a group. And lastly, trying to combine those 6 points in 3, last is the issue of shared expectations. We have to share our expectation, have a lot of iterations on the norms and the goals until we get to a middle ground of what we need to do, how we need to do that, and who to engage in the process. Because if there are differences at the onset on the goal and the process, everything, downstream will not be successful, and TD should start negotiating the goals, the norms, the processes, and those initial important issues. Before we conclude, we would like to share one important case studies, and I'm sure there are many more case studies. This is from IAI, I'm sure in FutureEarth, and we have also some examples in START that can be, channeled as ways to do transdisciplinarity. But IAI did an outstanding, study to develop a framework for flood response capacities in Latin America, which involve a lot of countries, at least 4, a lot of different disciplines from natural science, social science, engineering, research institution, policy, civil society. And together with this group, having all the iterations and defining the goals together, setting the problems together, engaging with the stakeholders, framing the issues with the policymakers, and looking for the resources available to address the issue of flooding. They come up with a framework to develop a science for general public and address the issues of policies and society on the issue of flood and flood reductions. They use a lot of IT, including GIS, and these examples can be replicated to other domains like bushfire, monitoring, or some of the risks which are faced in different geographical contexts. It's just one example to show that we're not just mentioning transdisciplinarity as a new concept which is still theoretical. It can be put into practice, and IAI has demonstrated the possibility to do so. In my last slide, before I hand it over to my colleagues, is to talk about the learning interventions. Everything comes back into capacity building. And coming from START International, it's of high interest of us to make sure that we improve performance in TD. And we have been doing that for many years thanks to NSF and my colleague Sarah Schweizer, who was running around organizing set of TD capacity building. And the objectives of doing that is to improve skills and competencies for collaboration and cross-stakeholders collaboration mostly. So unless people know that by collaborating we have a better product compared to the sum of the piece, then we are kind of slack in progressing TD. And that skills and competencies to embrace TD needs to be trained to people, needs to be trained to scientists, needs to be trained to stakeholders. And that's something important we would like everybody to remember in the audience. And the second bullet and last point I want to make here is the issue trying to know how to use your space as an individual to contribute to a highly diversified team. It's not easy that you are taken out of your area of confidence, right, out of your sphere of confidence, to go into new areas where the technicalities required to understand things might be a challenge, where the time you need to spend to understand the stakeholders and work with them towards sustainable solutions might be seen as a lot of time as compared to the time you have to deliver on things on which you're evaluated to. So it will require some sense of, you know, I don't mean sacrifice, but it needs a sense of the wisdom that, you know, host the principle of working with others for better life, for better environment, and for better well-being. And thank you for your attention, listening carefully to the next, section that another colleague will present. Bye.